Greetings. In 1983, a journey began that established the groundwork for a positive and historical change for the world. It's a pleasure to bring to you a unique and brief story about the building of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. The journey began with a spirited group conversation among Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity men and evolved into a full-fledged organizational campaign that engaged the whole world with an impactful conclusion that included an international recognition of Dr. King's Memorial Monument being presented to President Barack Obama on October 16, 2011. Enjoy our story.
Pleased I am to tell you a little bit about the memorial, how I got involved, where we are, and what's going to happen soon. How pleased we are that we have 4 acres of prime real estate on the title base between the Lincoln and Jefferson Memorial. I always like to frame it as what better place to put a king than between 2 presidents. Total project cost $120 million.
We're on a construction site. We're approximately 90% complete with the project, and the background noise you hear is part of the construction. But for the purpose of this presentation, I would like to give you an overview of how we arrived at the point that we are today, and some of the achievements and challenges that we faced in getting here. For those of you who may not be aware, November the 12th, 1996, Congress authorized the Martin Luther King National Memorial Project to be accomplished by Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity.
George Seeley, who was the person whose brainchild this was, came to me and said, let's do lunch. I said, okay. What's up, George? He said, we have this committee that we've been working on. It's called the Martin Luther King Memorial Committee. And I said, I haven't heard anything about it. Tell me about it. So he told me, he laid out everything. And because they had been working on this project for years, in terms of getting letters out, trying to get congressional support. But IUL knew nothing about it. And I said, well, under my presidency, that's not going to happen anymore. We've got to get this thing, sell the brothers, then sell the state, then sell the conference, sell the Eastern region, and sell the national organization on this project. So I set up a formal committee appointed by the president to charge them with moving this project forward as aggressively as possible.
About 5 brothers, including the guy named George Seeley, Al Bailey, 3 others, who came up with the concept that, not a lot of people of color are visiting the mall. How do we ensure that people of color visit the mall? Well, one way you do it is by having people of color on the mall. And they came up with this concept that there should be a memorial to somebody, and obviously the name, because they were alphas, Dr. Martin Luther King resounded with them.
During Martin Luther King's studies at Morehouse College, he was encouraged by community leaders to do God's work in society by becoming a minister. He graduated from Morehouse as an ordained minister in 1948, then went on to Crozer Theological Seminary in Chester, Pennsylvania, where he earned his Bachelor of Divinity degree in 1951. Continuing his education at Boston University, King began doctoral studies in systematic theology. While at Boston University, King was initiated into Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated in June of 1952, then later received his Doctor of Philosophy in 1955.
For years, these guys would come to the Alpha conventions. There would be a box on a table saying, make a donation to the Martin Luther King Memorial. And good alphas would say, okay, fine, here's $20, but then whisper under your breath, ain't nobody gonna build no memorial on Dr. King, but here's $20.
This effort was a result of 5 fraternity brothers in Silver Springs, Maryland, who took the legislative initiative to Capitol Hill for a total of 13 years before they were able to get the legislation approved and signed by then President Clinton. The purpose and goal for getting it approved was very simple: to build a memorial on the National Mall in honor to the legacy of Dr. King, and do it in such a way that it would complement what was already there in terms of monuments and memorials. But this memorial had to be distinctively different in its own right. We felt the most effective way to accomplish that was through an international competition.
Next comes, what does this thing look like? And so Dr. Ed Jackson, who's our executive architect, was on that committee. They did an international competition because they felt that this really ought to talk about Dr. King, not the African American hero, Dr. King, not the American hero, but Dr. King, the international hero, and how Dr. King changed the world, therefore solidifying his significance on this mall and why he's here. International competition, about over 1,500 entries went out, 900 entries came back from 52 different countries. The win design solution came from a group called the Roma, R-O-M-A group out of San Francisco. A great concept, and the concept was simply this. On the tidal basin in a crescent-shaped wall, Dr. King is standing there. But before you see Dr. King, you walk through two huge mountains of granite. These pieces of granite are 30 feet tall. We call that the Mountain of Despair, coming from the I Have a Dream speech. You still have not seen Dr. King until you walked out through the Mountain of Despair. On either side of the mountain, there's a crescent-shaped wall, 700 feet long, with Dr. King's quotations on it. And then you walk out towards the tidal basin, looking at Jefferson. On the third stone that looked like it was carved out of the two mountains, that's Dr. King standing on that stone. We call that the Stone of Hope. Thus, you have a creation of a wonderful, beautiful memorial to this first man of peace, first man of color, first non-president to be on this mall. After we came up with the concept, how do you raise $100 million? Well, you know, in most eyes, that's probably the cost of a sports franchise or some other mega thing that you're doing. So we sat down and said, hey, you can't raise $100 million by just being inclusive of Phi Alpha members, but you have to include everybody else. So we actually went to our current board donors and said, hey, Tommy Hilfiger, if you guys can give us $10 million or $5 million with Hilfiger, $10 million from General Motors, you get a seat on the board. And so we allowed those first people who came up with money to give them a seat on the Martin Luther King board. And so the task began, what else do you need to do in order to raise $100 million? So for a while we were stalled at about $16 million. We were ready to roll out our public campaign, a public phase of the campaign, and lo and behold, 9/11 occurred. The same week we're going to roll out, 9/11 occurred. So our fundraising consultant said, stop, you're not going to raise any money for the next foreseeable year. So we went silent again for a year. Then kicked off the campaign. We kicked it off with a direct mail marketing campaign. We kicked it off with what we call a dream dinner. We came up with this concept of doing a dream dinner in different places around the country. And lo and behold, J.W. Marriott offered his residents to do the first dream dinner. So we did a dream dinner at his house, 150 people seated in his dining room for a dinner. All of our members of our other board, our executive leadership cabinet, wanted to be at that dinner. And here's why. J.W. Marriott has the largest collection of Ferraris in the United States in his garage. And so people came to see not just J.W. Marriott or Colin Powell, but to see his collection of Ferraris. But what they did, it opened up to Chevy Chase Bank. It opened up to a couple other high-level dollar donors. And the concept of Dream Dinners kicked on. We continue to do our direct mail marketing campaign, which we raised about $1 million a year off of that. We do our internet campaign, but we continue to go after corporations, foundations, and we try to be industry specific. So early on, you saw a lot of automobile industries. So you saw General Motors, Toyota at $2 million, Ford at $2 million, Honda at $500,000. So we tried going after those particular industries.
Relative to the thought process about supporting the memorial, truthfully, it was quite simple. Honda is a company that holds many values very dear. And I think the most profound of those values is one that we call respect for the individual. And truthfully, that's what the memorial stands for, respect for all people. And so as we contemplated whether we should support it, it made just abundant sense for our company and great sense for our society.
We are excited and delighted to be a part of the Martin Luther King Memorial Foundation project. Aetna just recently gave the memorial $1,275,000 in honor of the work that Dr. Martin Luther King did while he was with us and the legacy that he has created that continues on long after he was assassinated.
Very excited to be a part of the Dr. Martin Luther King Memorial. Such an important part of our American history, and we realize that this is a fitting tribute to the contributions that he's made to our society. And so we donated $1 million to the project, and shortly after that realized that the construction, to support the construction of the project, gave a $12.5 million letter of credit to enable construction to begin. And most recently, we gave $500,000 to support the dedication to the memorial.
And as we review the major challenges here, I will discuss from this document the major elements that focused on developing the product that you will experience today. The first of which, we had to identify a granite suitable for representing an African American. And we went to several countries, the first of which was Italy. Italy is known as the broker for granite all over the world. But we were unable to find the color granite that we were looking for, even though they had samples from almost every corner of the world. We came back to America, and the designer had indicated that there was a granite from California, their native state, that they wanted to use. We took a look at it. It was a combination of gray and black and white pigments, and it did not give the right image that we were looking for. So we scrapped that idea and went in search on our own for the appropriate color. In our follow-on visit to San Francisco, they took us to a sculptor's garden in Oakland, California. In that garden, there were numerous examples of granite, and I walked upon a granite bench, and it was brown. And we said, "Where did you get this color granite?" And the sculptor said, "I got this from China."
More than 150 granite blocks weighing some 1,600 tons were then shipped from Xiamen, China to the port of Baltimore and reassembled by a team of 100 workmen, including 10 Chinese stonemasons brought over specifically for the project.
We came back to our office here in Washington, went on the internet, and discovered that granite did exist and in large quantity. So we had resolved the problem in terms of material. The next thing we had to do was find an appropriate artist with skill sets in producing an art piece of the magnitude that we're talking about. Now, you have to put this in perspective. The centerpiece is 30 feet high, 12 foot wide, 29 foot deep, the largest freestanding granite sculpture to be designed and constructed in America. We had one bite at the apple, and it had to be done correctly. I recall a conversation I had with Mrs. King when we announced the winners of the design competition. And she expressed to me how disappointed she had been in several other sculptures of her husband. Say this much. I told Mrs. King, I said, "I promise you, I won't let you down." And so what we did, once we returned from Italy, States, I asked my program manager to go onto the internet and type in stone carver and see what you could find. With stone carver, the first thing that popped up on the internet was an international stone carver symposium in St. Paul, Minneapolis. They had stone carvers from Finland, Egypt, Italy, Spain, Germany, Zimbabwe, China, Japan, and the United States. We said, we've got to get up there and have a conversation with those guys. And when we got there, it was around noontime, and we proceeded to go to the first sculptor to take a look at his work and have a conversation with him to see whether or not he would be interested in our project. He said yes, but he also said one more thing. "I think you need to talk to that guy over there." We went to the second guy. He said the same thing. The third and the fourth said the same thing. By the time we got to the fourth person, I looked at my group and I said, "I think we're onto something." And We finished interviewing all of the other sculptors, and he does not speak a word of English. And I will say to the audience, I do not speak a word of Chinese. But there is one common language, and that is art, whether it's music or painting or sculpture. And what he did is he handed me his portfolio. I invited him to Washington, D.C. as a result of that experience. He arrived after this particular obligation had been fulfilled. I wanted him to be aware of the significance of what this project was all about. I also wanted him to be aware of the level of quality of the project and the skill that I wanted to bring to this experience. He assured me that he could do the job. I said, well, that's fine, but I want to go to China and see for myself your own body of work. Freestanding, I can examine in my own eyes. He said, yes, come. 2 months later, we visited China. And the first thing we experienced in his conference room, he had samples of the stone that we had seen on the web and in the garden in Oakland, California. He said, there are 4 different sites that I can take you to where you can examine this stone. He says, but before you do, I want you to come into my studio. I have something I want to show you. And he had not been targeted as the sculptor of record. This is what he had to show us on our initial visit. He had redesigned the centerpiece of the Stone of Hope. When I was presented the original concept by Master Lei Sing, the first thing I said to him was, I noticed that you have actually pulled Dr. King out of the stone. He says, yes. In China, Dr. King is considered a warrior. I said, a warrior? He said to me, yes, a warrior for peace. And he said, this is still a part of the mountain of despair. The symbol of hope is here. So I pulled him out, making the centerpiece of the memorial an even more dramatic experience for the visitor. I embraced that.
But from the onset, this was an international project, So we talk about the international king. And Dr. King has memorials all over the world, in case people don't know that he really does. Germany, you name it, there are streets, there are schools, there are libraries, there are things named after Dr. King because people saw him as a unifier, if you will. I propose that a couple of things are going to happen around dedication. Number one, people from all over the world, and we think about 250,000 to 400,000 people will come to D.C. to see this first memorial to a man of peace, man of color, and non-president. But then who will receive this memorial? President Barack Obama. Now, God's hand is in everything that we do because, to be honest with you, this memorial should have been completed 3 years ago. But because of stalemates with the Park Service over security, we did not get our building permit until a year and a half ago. Had it been done 3 years ago, then President George Bush would have received this on behalf of this country, on behalf of this fraternity and this foundation. As fate would have it, the first memorial to a man of color is going to be dedicated and turned over to the first president of color, Barack Obama. That's something that we could not plan. But a couple of things that happened at the site. In April every year, this famed cherry tree happens to bloom, every year. It's a tree that the Japanese gave the United States as a gift. Very pinkish in color. It just bursts into color every year. Typically that thing blooms the first week in April, which is basically the time when Dr. King was assassinated. We could not have made that up. Our address here at the memorial is 1964 Independence Avenue, going along with when President Johnson signed into law the civil rights legislation with Dr. King standing over his right shoulder and then giving him an ink pen. All these things could not have happened by just Harry Johnson alone or others, but because there was a greater force in this. How pleased we are that you will see the first memorial to Dr. King at our nation's capital, first memorial to a man of peace, man of color. How pleased we are to say this is going to be a gift to our nation.
What you see depicted over my left shoulder is the final product that Master Lay and his crew had completed on the 30th of December, 2010. At this point, he turned to me and said, "I have completed my task." And he wanted to know whether or not I was satisfied with what he had accomplished. He was looking for my blessing. Can you imagine that? And obviously I told him that I was pleased with his work. And depicted here, my associate, Mieko Preston, and myself, Master Lay's son, and the rest of his team.
And Master Lay was just a master sculptor in China. Found him. So we accepted our criticism on him. Why choose a Chinese guy? I answered the critics very simple like this. Dr. King said we should not judge a person by the color of his skin, but by the content of his character. In these terms, we're talking artistic character. Now let's move on. And when you see what this man has done, your mouth will drop because he's got Dr. King dead on. Dr. King's kids saw that, and so we relish in the fact that we believe we have the best person doing the job.
Dr. King's memorial, as was his life, was not in the hands of mere men, architects, builders, and event planners, but a higher force which decided to accept an invitation to attend the memorial dedication on Sunday, August 28, 2011. Hurricane Irene washed the city clean, bringing to life the famous words spoken by Dr. King himself, "Until justice rolls down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream." The stage was now set, and the earth was now ready. October 16, 2011, ironically but fittingly, the 16th anniversary of the Million Man March, became the day Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity officially presented the memorial to the National Parks Foundation, with President Obama accepting on behalf of the nation. Indeed, a Sweet 16 celebration, 27 years in the making.
An earthquake and a hurricane may have delayed this day, but this is a day that would not be denied. For this day, we celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s return to the National Mall.
Indeed, a Sweet 16 celebration, 27 years in the making.